Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the opportunity to chat with Brett Crosby of Cowley, Wyoming. So for starters, Brett, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you're located.
I'm located in Cowley, Wyoming, 45 miles northeast of Cody, Wyoming, about 90 miles west of Sheridan and 90 miles south of Billings. I'm a fifth-generation rancher. We homesteaded the farm that my father lives on right next to mine in 1900. And every ancestor that I can track has run either sheep or cattle. It goes back to 1840s and 50s when they came across the plains and started settling in the West. So ranching runs deep in my blood. I went to college long enough to become a doctor, but I just ended up with an MBA. You know, all I really ever wanted to do is be a cowboy, and I've said this before, but, you know, my dad had just survived the 80s when I graduated from college, and I came back, and he said, you know, you're welcome to be a rancher, but I'm not going to give you mine. So I started doing some consulting work for a couple of different economists. At that point in time, there were a lot of people with a lot of carryover debt from the 80s farm crisis, and I did a lot of workouts. I'm accredited rural appraiser, and in 2004 we started an economic consulting firm that focused on research and outreach education in the farm sector and ag sector. And that's when we began developing beefbasis.com, which is a price forecasting model or price forecasting website that uses the futures markets and a number of other things to estimate prices for calves, not just steers, but steers, heifers, at various weights in various locations on various dates. Along the way, I bought my first cows a year after I graduated from college and started building my herd.
What do you feel are the major issues standing in the way of fair cattle markets today?
First, we have to define fair. To me, as an ardent follower of Adam Smith, Milton Friedman, and Hayek, I am a free market capitalism guy, which means that I believe the fastest, most efficient way to prosperity is through free market capitalism, which means that there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. But free market capitalism only works if the government, and this is a government role, ensures fair competition. Because the problem with capitalism is that eventually there is one winner, and then that becomes a monopoly, and the advantages of free markets go away. Or there are 3 or 4 winners, which just become an oligopoly, and prices are still fixed, and the advantages of capitalism still go away, which is what we have today in the cattle industry. We have an oligopoly with 80% or more of the cattle being processed by 4 companies. And it doesn't stop there, because probably 25 to 30% of the cattle that are killed are fed in maybe 6 feedlots or by 6 feedlot feeding companies. So there is, not only is there consolidation across the packer sector, there is growing consolidation in the feedlot sector, which, as an aside, is why we're getting so much, the industry is getting so much pushback on any type of regulation that tries to ensure more price discovery. Consolidation is a huge issue. Setting aside the question about illegal activity, there is absolutely a concentration of pricing power when you have only 4 bidders and you've got hundreds of sellers. To put that into perspective, imagine a sale barn where we have thousands, several thousand calves running through in a day, and 80% of them are purchased by 4 people. And to make things worse, if cattle come from a certain place, then you only have 2 bidders. And so then if one of them gets up to go to the bathroom or has filled his truck or whatever, you are at the mercy of the last remaining bidder, which is where we've been in western Nebraska and eastern Colorado for the last few weeks. JBS hasn't been in the market, and Cargill has been the only player. Legal or not, that gives Cargill pretty much uninhibited pricing power.
What do you feel would be a solution to fix this consolidation within the industry?
This is a big shift. It's kind of like trying to turn an aircraft carrier, because the consolidation that we have seen so far has taken place over a number of years, and we either need the big 4 to sell some plants, which I don't see happening, or we need to add capacity so that we have more competition from bidders. There are huge barriers to entry, though, and when it comes to building a processing plant. First of all, there are regulatory and there are just capital constraints. The cost of construction is enormous. Then you have timing. It's gonna take at a minimum 3 years to build a brand new processing plant, and we know that the cattle market is cyclical, and so there's a risk factor on top of those barriers to entry that the margins that the packers see now won't be there when a new plant gets online. And so those things present obstacles for anyone who is trying to get investors to buy into a new plant to add capacity. But I think that's ultimately what has to happen. I think it is happening. It's going to happen first on a small scale. We're going to see existing plants, the existing state-inspected processing plants that don't generally sell other people's beef, they just process for people. I see those plants perhaps expanding. There are some regional processing plants that are in various stages of production, from feasibility study to actually working on plans. That's probably how the ship rights itself, but it's not going to happen this year. It likely won't happen next year. But, another thing to understand that is important to understand is, as livestock producers, we look at the supply side. We look at, okay, how do we keep this plant full, and how do we keep it running? But there is a whole other ingredient to a successful process, which is distribution. You have to be able to sell the entire animal, and there are some economies of scale. Corbett Wall once, explained it to me and said, you got to be big enough to sell the byproducts, because what are you going to do with a bag of kidneys? That is incredibly important, and so often overlooked. But you have to have people that can distribute this product, which means they have to have experience, and they have to have connections, and they have to be talented and skilled in handling logistics. So there is that aspect of processing. And we can't forget that while processing a beef isn't necessarily rocket science, it's not an unskilled job either. And finding people who are willing to work in a packing plant and have the skills to work in a packing plant is more and more difficult.
Do you feel that there are solutions that could be implemented in the near future that would increase competition within our markets versus these long-term fixes that will come about eventually, but not in the near future?
Yes. The 2 most important fixes that can be implemented in the near term are, number 1, the packers have found a loophole to the packer ownership limitation. and that needs to be taken away. That loophole comes by way of agreements with formula yards. So, for example, they will negotiate a formula with the yard, and part of that formula dictates that the yard will sell exclusively to them. So packers technically don't own them. They're technically not theirs, but it's captive supply nonetheless, because they know what they have, they know what's coming, and they can use that to their advantage when they don't want to pay what they think they may have to in the cash market. And so the cash market becomes just kind of a spillover capacity filler rather than a true competitive market. Then obviously we need more price discovery. And to all people who say we don't want government intervening in our markets, my response is government caused the damn problem, so if you don't want them intervening, then take the problem that they caused away. And what I mean by that is that the reason we don't have price discovery from formulas is that the confidentiality rules are in place and hide the price that these large feedlots are receiving, because they control enough of a regional market that were their price to be reported in a timely manner, everyone would know who was receiving that price. So let's look at that. What that did, when that rule, that confidentiality rule was implemented in, I believe, 2008, it gives large feedlots incentive to become large enough that they qualify for confidentiality, right? They have a substantial incentive to own their regional market so that they can negotiate a deal with the packers that they don't have to report. And so their prices are then just aggregated. They come out 2 weeks after the cash price because they come out as a formula net price. We no longer get information on formula-based prices or formula premiums and discounts. And as a result, we don't have any price discovery. Now, if formula trades were required to report their base price and their premiums and discounts regardless of confidentiality, then we would have no need for the Grassley bill. But government gave these feedlots and processing plants that confidentiality protection. And so there is no other remedy than further government intervention. So for the anti-interventionists, my response is just simply, if you don't want intervention with the Grassley bill or something akin to it, then let's take out all government intervention, which includes the confidentiality rule. You can't have it both ways. So I know that was a long explanation, but the short answer is we need to close the committed yard loophole that allows packers to have captive supply, and we need some sort of price discovery either through the Grassley bill. 30% would be enough, but I know a lot of people feel 50% is required. We do need some sort of price discovery.
So in your opinion, obviously there's a lot of folks against the Grassley bill. Do you think there's a good chance that will get passed, or do you think there's going to be too much opposition?
You know, it's unfortunate that we have a lot of people in the industry who are opposed to it, either because the current system is favorable to them, which isn't quite as unfortunate. You expect everybody to look out for their own interest, right? Then we have a sizable contingent that just says, oh, well, we don't want government intervention. I don't like government intervention, but we've got to do something. To answer your question, there is a lot of pushback here, but I think there is a better chance now than there has ever been. And I think that we had very good discussions. The U.S. cattlemen had their virtual fly-in. Everybody talked with their congressional delegation. I know in Wyoming, we had a very good discussion with our congressional delegation, and they understand the problem. And I left our discussion with the impression that they were committed to do something to help price discovery. So I believe there's a lot of opposition, but I think we have a better chance now than we've ever had in the past,
Right.
especially after the COVID nightmare.
What are your thoughts on the DOJ investigation into our big meat packers? Do you think we'll see some results? Do you think this is going to help the industry?
You know, National Beef came out and said that the scope of their subpoena was very narrow, which leads me to believe that they may be looking for now only at the retail price spike and not necessarily at the price discrepancy between the box beef price and live cattle price. I think it's unlikely that the current DOJ investigation will reveal much or will effect much change. However, when we look at the data and we see that taking the value of cattle in aggregate that are purchased by the packers, so the total value of all the cattle purchased in the country, and then the total value of all the beef sold as boxed beef, then we have margin there, right? So subtracting the total value of cattle from the total value of beef gives a total margin to the packing sector. That's not any one particular packer, that's just the packing sector. During the last 3 years, the packing sector has averaged, let me look, I think it's about $200 million a week. In any case, the value of beef minus the value of the cattle for the packing sector during the 6 weeks following April 15th tripled. There is likely to be some sort of inquiry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking from June 17 to around December of 19. The gross packing sector revenue was between $50 million and $100 million a week. It reached a high of $614 million during the week of May 30th. So from the 28th of March to the 30th of May, which would have been the first week of June, the average was about $343 million, but remember that was with some plant closures along the way. Regardless, for the 2 years before that, the average weekly gross to the packing sector was about $236 million a week. But then from the 15th to the 30th, the average is $423 million. The packers can't say, well, we had to pay less for cattle and charge more for beef because we were running at 50% capacity and we still had to cover our overhead. That dog won't hunt. Yeah, so the current investigation, no, but with these data, I can't imagine the Senate, especially, who has taken great interest in this, not wanting some sort of an explanation on why these numbers are what they are.
Earlier this year, President Trump made the statement that he would like to terminate trade deals where America imports cattle. What are your thoughts on imports of cattle and beef?
Well, like I said, I'm a free trade guy. Mm-hmm. So I believe that free trade is a good thing. I believe that we do need to draw the line as long as capacity is constrained and as long as we have enough cattle in the U.S. to kill, I think that it is problematic for packers it's problematic at best. It's price fixing at worst for packers to import live cattle to process in their plants and to take up space that would otherwise be devoted to our own cattle. As far as importing beef, I mean, if we've learned anything in the last few years, we've learned that boxed beef prices don't really affect the price that we receive for our cattle. So, if they want to import beef and sell it, let them have at it. The big problem I see is deceptive labeling. When they are able to label beef that has been processed in some way in this country, even though it was imported, when they're able to label that beef as a product of the USA, that's, I think, a deceptive labeling practice that needs to stop.
Right. So you think MCOOL should be implemented?
I don't necessarily believe that MCOOL is the answer, but I certainly don't think that packers should be able to label something a product of the USA when it is in fact not. So if they find value in labeling something a product of the USA, which obviously they appear to, and they're no longer able to with imported beef, then I don't think it needs to be mandatory country of origin labeling. I think it's going to force them to pay a premium for U.S. beef because they obviously find value in labeling beef as such.
Do you think there's a chance we could price ourselves out of a product at the retail and restaurant level if prices of beef don't return to pre-COVID levels?
One of the biggest problems that we're going to face going forward, especially in light of a coming recession, is that beef demand is highly correlated to disposable income. We need to watch that very closely. On the other hand, we don't want to start fixing prices because price is the way that we ration goods and services. If it's a simple supply and demand thing, but we certainly want to make sure that we don't make beef any more expensive for consumers at the retail level through any of the government remedies that we're pursuing.
Right now, we're seeing cattle markets that are not fundamentally supported. What is the cause of this, and how long do you think the cattle markets can continue to sustain such levels that aren't supported by basic fundamentals?
There's two answers. First of all, I think similar to the March feeder cattle market, which just didn't make any sense at all. I mean, the implied value of gain for the feeder cattle index was like 33 cents or some ridiculous number. It was down in the 30s, meaning that anyone who bought steers at the feeder cattle index price and would have to sell them at whatever the August futures were, would have to be able to feed them at 33 cents a pound of gain. I think what we are seeing now is similar to what we saw then, which I think was the feedlots, feeder cattle market saying, we don't believe that the futures are an accurate reflection of where cattle are going to be trading. So there may be some of that going on. We also, during the worst 2 weeks of processing constraints, and really all through the month of April and the first week or two of May, we saw packers drawing heavily on their committed yards. And so the formula feedlots had their inventory drawn down substantially, while all the rest of us had cattle getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So I think what is also happening is that the formula yards are trying to replace their inventory at a time when a lot of people just turned their cattle out to grass and said, we're not going to sell them for $1.20. Yeah. So they turned them out to grass. So we have, and I haven't seen the feeder cattle index numbers, but I suspect that this is a time of year when not a lot of feeder cattle trade, and so we're seeing formula yards that were pretty much out of cattle trying to replace inventory during a time when there just aren't a lot of feeder cattle that are coming to market.
What do you see happening to the American cattle producer if some kind of changes aren't made and we continue to experience these lopsided cattle markets? Do you think we're in danger of becoming vertically integrated?
I think there is a danger there, but we're in a little bit different position than the other proteins. One thing that both helps and hurts us is that 35% of the cattle or around about there raised in the United States are raised on operations that have less than 100 head or less than 50 head. So it would take quite a bit for processors to be able to vertically integrate all the way down to the farm level or the ranch level. But I absolutely think that we are in danger of becoming more vertically integrated in the feedlot sector of the industry. Getting hit with the Holcomb fire and then getting hit with COVID on top of margins that just kind of stunk anyway,
Right.
has really taken it out a lot of these farmer feeders and the mid-sized feeders that are the lifeblood of the feedlot sector.
What are your thoughts on the backlog of cattle that our industry is facing? There's a lot of numbers been thrown out there about how many cattle we have to work through. Do you have some thoughts on the number, and do you think we'll be able to work through them this year?
The short answer is yes, but it's regionally and operationally specific. Like I said before, the formula lots are very current. It's the northern lots and it's the small and mid-sized lots that are running into weight problems. Cattle slaughter weights have been declining since they peaked, so that tells us that in aggregate we're getting more current. We have fewer cattle on feed, so there will be, year over year, the cattle on feed numbers are down, so that will mean fewer cattle are coming to market in July and August than last year. If box beef movement stays relatively strong and if processing capacity is running near normal, then yeah, in aggregate we're going to get through these numbers, but it will take a long time for the Nebraska and North feedlots to get through their inventory because, like I said before, they're just kind of the overflow. And so, we need to keep a close watch on the cattle on feed numbers in Nebraska, the Dakotas, Iowa, and parts of Kansas.
Do you think our industry can come together and get on the same page? Oftentimes we fight more amongst ourselves than fighting the issues that are trying to tear our industry apart. So do you think we can get on the same page and fight for a common goal?
That's literally the billion-dollar question, and the biggest problem that stands in our way is the largest organization representing the beef industry in Washington is trying to represent competing interests. And so when those competing interests, specifically the interests of small feedlots and cow-calf operations versus large feedlots and packers, are at odds with one another, then that organization really has their hands tied, regarding what they can do. And so, it's going to take change at the producer level, and we are going to have to, as producers, we are going to have to make our voice heard and, set aside our differences on other issues and focus on the one problem that threatens us and threatens our survival at the moment, whatever that problem may be. But I know that was a hedge. Long term, I think that it's possible. Short term, there are enough people with enough power, and the power is consolidated enough that it will be very difficult for us in the short term to come together with one voice.